So let's get started. The two colors that I'm using today, I'm going to kind of just hold them up here so that you can see, and you'll be able to see these in the work area too. So these are a couple of Daniel Smith colors. One of them is called Alvaro's Fresco Gray, and the other is Gray Titanium. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to my work area, and then let's take a look and see what these are doing. So you can see these again. I'll write these up in the description for the video when we're done. But during my cloud series, I was mixing a lot of my own grays, which is great and that works fine. But I would notice that for my clouds, I was having too much dispersal, meaning that the colors were separating, and I would usually mix an ultramarine blue with some quin sienna to get my grays, and that works out great. And they will tend to sort of separate from one another, the blue and the sienna. But I was not wanting that to happen with my clouds. I really wanted those grays to stay full and intact, and that was just not happening. So let me, before I start here, I'm just going to hold this up a little bit closer. I've just squeezed out some here so that you can see. So the Alvaro Gray, it looks black, almost like the Bloodstone Genuine, and the Gray Titanium it really is sort of a lighter gray color. And of course, these are going to give you grays that do not disperse and separate. I usually like that kind of thing, but with my cloud series, I really wanted those grays to stay intact. All right, so I want to just show you what these colors can do, and this is a great way to test any new color that you want. It really kind of lets you see what the color is capable of, okay? Highly recommend you practicing this with your own colors so that you know what you've got. So I've got two little sheets of paper that are taped off so that I can kind of test each one of these out, and I'm going to start by just taking my brush, and I'm going to come down from the top just a little bit, and I'm just brushing on some water right here on the paper. This is just some Arches paper, and I talk about this in my workshops too. Even when you're practicing and testing color, please make sure that you're using good quality paper, because if you test all these colors on paper that's not that great, you really have no idea what they're going to do once you start working on a painting. And you want to bring some good good quality paper into it. You really don't even know what it's going to be doing. All right, so I'm going to start with the Gray Titanium, and just a little bit of background on the Gray Titanium. Everybody's very familiar with titanium white, and titanium is a mineral type component, but it is not white. It has to be bleached, for it to become white. So the Gray Titanium is basically like a raw titanium that has not been bleached, I guess, whatever the process is that they do to get all the color out. But you can see kind of how it looks, and I have added just a little bit of water to activate this, but I want to keep the color nice and thick so that I can really see what it looks like at full strength. And I'm going to bring that color right up to this band of water that I painted on the paper, just for the purpose of allowing it to kind of creep forward. I just want to see how much dispersal it's capable of. Okay, that's very important for me to know what's kind of going on with that. Another thing that I like to do, so I'll just let that sit. I'll do one thing too, I forgot to do this. I'll hold it at an angle. You can see the band of water. You can see how thick that band of water was. And this was dry paper, and I just put the pigment on and let it, brush all the way up till it made contact with this little band of water. And so you can see it starting to ooze and spread, and I just want to leave that alone just to see what it's going to do. I just want to know what that behavior is for that. And then the next thing that I'll do, I'm using my little spritz bottle here. Down on the bottom portion of the sample card, I'm just going to kind of spritz a little bit. And when you spritz, you do get the paper wet, but it's very irregular. Let me show it to you. See how you kind of have little pits of dry paper? All those little bits of water droplets just sort of come down, and the coverage is uneven, whereas with your brush, it's very even coverage, okay? But I want to see how the pigment behaves with uneven coverage. And so I'll get some more of the pigment, and I want to come into this dry area up here, and I'm just going to start adding some of the value, some of the color right up here at the edge where I can see the droplets. And I'm on purpose, I'm going to add a little bit more water to my solution here. I'm going to just kind of come in here and start dropping the pigment in on top of some of these little droplets, just so that I can kind of see how it behaves. And then I'm even going to tilt my board so that the color can run just a little bit. See it running? And if you have some of it run a little bit, you know, in places where you don't want it to go, just have a towel handy so you can kind of mop up your edges here. Sometimes if you get a little, especially with the sprayer, if you get too much water, you can kind of have a little micro disaster sometimes. All right, so I just want to mop up the edges there. All right, so let's take a look at that right now, what it's doing. You can see this is a very similar sort of technique as what we used up here, okay? This was really smooth though, coming into a band of water. This was some irregular water placement, but I just want to see how it behaves, because different pigments, the dispersal is that moment where the pigment touches the water and it sort of just bleeds and chases, and it just kind of oozes. Some pigments will really take off fast. Some of them just sort of seep and crawl along and don't move that quickly. And it's important to know which ones are going to do that. And the mineral content of the pigment has a lot to do with how it behaves. All right, now in this section in here, I want to do a little bit of a gradient. Okay, so I'm going to start over here with kind of solid. Just really kind of putting it in here full strength. And then I'm going to just clean out my brush, get everything out. And I am using clean water. You know, anytime you want to experiment with your colors, make sure you've got clean water with each color so that you're not contaminating. So this is just some, you know, clear-ish water. And I'm just filling up this area over here with some water, working my way. You notice I'm really getting lots of water. I don't want the water standing, but I do want the paper to be really saturated. And I'm going to make my way over here to where I dropped off. And I want to just create a little blend here. You know, kind of going from a light version to a darker version of the pigment, just to see what it looks like in the middle. And then lastly on this color, I've actually got some salt here in a cup, so I'm just going to get a few little sprinkles of the salt, and I'm going to find an area where, you know, the paint is still a little bit wet, and I'm just going to do a couple little salt sprinkles, just a couple. I don't want to overdo it, just so that I can kind of see how it's going to behave and respond to salt. All right, so if you've been in one of my classes or you've watched one of my demos, you know, there's a lot of different brushwork techniques that you do as you're working your way through a painting. And this little sample card kind of will demonstrate to me pretty much all of the scenarios that I might typically use in a landscape painting. So, you know, a solid area, a wet area, making contact with a solid. This area becomes a gradient from dark to light. And then this is, you know, dispersion. Okay, this is where I'm testing how far the pigment will run on its own through some uneven water. And then I just followed up with a couple little random sprinkles, not all over the whole thing, because I still want to see what the solid areas look like. But this will give me an indication later of what the little salt areas are going to look like. You can see I just put a little bit in a couple of places, okay? All right, so let's try, we're going to let that kind of just sit. And here's one thing I want to show you before we actually go to the next color. This is one of the things that I love about this color. You know, just the hue itself, the color itself is absolutely beautiful and so natural. And the gray does have some dispersion where it's really dark in the center, and then you have just, you know, lighter versions that almost have, I want to say, sort of an ochre type of color, you know, where the paint kind of thins out just a little bit when the dispersion takes place, but it's very subtle. Got something on there, I don't know what that is. But the solid color, it does have a little bit of granulation, and I really love that. It almost looks like stone, or, you know, you could imagine all kinds of ways that you could use this, different applications for this, especially in a landscape. Anything that granulates is really beautiful. But what's great about this is that here's a gray that is right out of the tube, but, you know, it doesn't separate into multiple colors. You know, when you're really wanting your gray to stay gray. I think we've all had that experience where we've mixed gray with ultramarine and sienna, and it looks great, but, you know, if you want some dispersion, you know, or a soft edge, as soon as it hits that wet on wet, the sienna always outruns the blue. The dispersion for the sienna is always greater, and so it makes a difference. All right, so let me clean my brush out and get some clear water. I've got another container here for some clear water. My coffee is also here too. I almost stuck my brush in my coffee just a second ago. All right, so I'm just rinsing this out, and just, this is clear water, and I did start with the lighter color just in case I had any deposit of color left in my brush, just a little bit. But let's take a look at the Alvaro Fresco gray. And I prematurely wet this earlier, but I'm wetting it again, just that little band of color. Excuse me, a band of water there. All right, so I'm going to get into this this Fresco gray, Alvaro Fresco gray. When you're using this, and, you know, I'm just getting the water in here. I don't want to make a real thin wash. I want it to be pretty concentrated. I really want to see what this pigment is going to do at full strength. And when you're working with it, it looks very much like neutral tint. The color, you know, when you're working with it on the palette, it almost looks identical, but they are a little bit different on the paper. All right, so this little bit of color had time to kind of dry up just a little bit, so it's taking me a little bit longer to get it wet. I'm just adding a tiny amount of water, but I really want to get a nice puddle of rich pigment here. All right, so that's looking pretty good. All right, so like before, I'm going to start on dry paper up here at the top, and I'm going to start filling this in and working my way toward this band of just water. And I want to just touch the water and just start, I'm just going to let it bleed and just see what it's going to do. And you can see it's starting to move. And this one has a lot more dispersion than the titanium. Okay, you can see, look the little fingers of pigment, look how much longer they are. It really likes to run away. And so that's what we refer to as dispersion. Okay, so I really like dispersion in color, especially as a landscape painter, because these are, you know, I'll turn this around just so that I can make the point. I'm going to turn this upside down from the way I'm working, but you can see how that can be just like a distant row of trees, and it was just dispersion. I did not paint them. The pigment did the work for me. Okay, I'm going to turn it back around now. But that's one of the reasons that I like dispersion so much. But while I've got this close, let's take a look. The difference between this is really nice, rich, and dark, and I can even get it a little bit darker. In fact, let me see if I can just do that right quick, right at the top. This one does have some a little bit more transparency. The titanium over here, it's pretty opaque, because titanium is pretty opaque. That's why oil painters and acrylic painters love titanium white, because it really has a lot of coverage, offers lots of coverage. All right, so I went back over that a little bit darker. But here's what you get with this. It has almost, it does some granulation as well, okay, and the dispersion is fantastic. I love the dispersion, but it has a little bit of a blue tone to it. It looks almost as if I have taken neutral tint and added a little bit of ultramarine blue to it. Is kind of what it reminds me of. But the beauty of this one is that the two colors are not separating from one another. You know, I've just got this one color, so you can see how important these grays were in the making of cloud paintings, because they just stay put. They don't move around too much and give me a bunch of unwanted color. All right, so let me put that down. It does have a little blue tint to it. It's beautiful, beautiful color, absolutely gorgeous. All right, so as soon as I put my brush in that water with that dark, you can see it just really took care of that. All right, so again, like with the other one, I'm going to come down to the bottom of my little sample card with my little spritz bottle, and I'm just going to kind of loosely spray and sprinkle. I'll show it to you just so you can see what happened here. See how uneven? You see the little droplets? They're just hit and miss. Some dry paper, some water droplets, just a mixture. Whereas up here with my brush, it was just one nice smooth panel of color. All right, again, I'm going to take the brush and get it loaded up really well. And I realize I have just about used that one up. Let me get just a little bit more. Making sample cards is so relaxing, and it's just it's pressure free. You're not, because you're not making a piece of art. You're just figuring out what your color does, and it's really an enjoyable process. I highly recommend that you make a little sample card for all of your pigments, because otherwise you really don't know what they do. It's kind of like, if you've made a recipe and you're about to serve it to a group of people, I always want to taste it first just to make sure that, what's going on before I really put it out there on the real, in the real world and test it on people. And so before you start a painting, kind of practice with your colors a little bit. We're going to do a huge segment of that in the workshop coming up, where we're sampling our colors but also making some art with it at the same time. So if you're still interested in that workshop, there's plenty of time to sign up for it. We'll start it next Tuesday, and we'll do that for 7 days, and all of it will be live, but all the replays will be available if you're not unavailable at the time of the broadcast. All right, so just tapping around, and I'm not tapping, it is a random pattern that I'm tapping, but I'm being careful to always touch where there's a water droplet, okay, because I do want to preserve the dry paper. That's kind of the point of doing that little technique. And I'm just going to tilt my board just a little bit. I've got a little bit too much water right here that's okay. All right, so I'm just going to tilt that and just see what these, I like to see how the pigment runs through uneven water. They behave differently. And oops, I definitely got some pigment coming in here that I didn't mean to. All right. And I've also got 2 sample cards taped to the same board just to make it easier for this morning, but I would suggest maybe doing one at a time. And these are kind of like little 5x7 sheets, because you need a bigger area to work with, just so you can really see what's going on. All right, you can see all these little finger-like textures that come out of the pigment. All right, and then lastly, I'm going to do a gradient. So I'm going to start over here, kind of dark. This color is a lot more transparent than the titanium. I can see through it. I can see through the paper, see through to the paper much easier with this color than I can the titanium. It's got a lot of opacity to it. Super fun color to work with. All right, and this is just some clear water over here that I'm bringing back to the middle here to kind of just make a little blend. Yeah, it's so transparent. I have to go really light with the water. Excuse me, really heavy with the water to get the pigment to lighten up. Okay, but see, that's something that I need to know before I start using the color, or else I'll get into my painting and then it's like, whoa, okay, this color is not doing what I thought it was. And that's where it's important for us to, you know, spend some time testing and playing with our colors so that we know what in the world what we've got to work with. You know, it really is almost like, I know I'll use a lot of food analogies, but it is kind of like just grabbing a spice and just sticking it in a recipe, and you don't even know what that tastes like or anything. And so it's a big risk. So it's really important to kind of test these things out to see what they're going to do. And then I'm going to grab my salt again and just do a couple little places. You know, I want to see what the salt's going to do in this solid area, and then maybe in one of these lighter areas too. Okay, just a tiny little bit. I don't want to overdo it because I still want to just see what the color does by itself. But let's look at the difference between the dispersion. Look at all this dispersion, okay? It just keeps growing and moving, okay, and changing. This is how I was getting a lot of that rainfall effect out of my clouds. I'm depending on the pigment to do a lot of dispersion for me. Because you don't want to paint these little fingers. You want them to come out of the pigment itself. One of the reasons I absolutely love watercolor, you're really working in conjunction with it. You're partnering with it. Let it do some work for you because it loves to. But the dispersion is not so much with the titanium. It's a heavier pigment. The titanium is much heavier than the mineral components. Let's see. Sometimes Daniel Smith will tell me. Let's see. Okay. Okay, well, this is very interesting. Let me get, sorry, it wasn't right in the field of view, but Daniel Smith is very good to always kind of put like a little recipe on the back of their tubes that tells you what's in the pigment. And I had mentioned the blue cast, and you can really see it in these areas that are thin, and it's almost kind of an indigo, like a violet blue. And sure enough, when I look on here, the pigments that are used to create this gray are ultramarine violet, titanium white, and some ultramarine blue. Okay, and then there's another color that is only, it's assigned a number, and so I don't know what that is. It's some kind of mineral component. But it tells you what's in there. But that's why I'm seeing that blue and kind of violet cast to it. Beautiful, beautiful color, but it's real stable and it really stays together. And I've even mixed these two colors together, you know, in paintings, and they do really well, as you can imagine. All right, so I'm going to let these dry. You can see the salt effects are already starting to happen here, and look what's happening over here in the titanium. It's fantastic. This almost looks like a a horizon with like a snowy kind of field with just random shapes, you know, that it's almost, this little technique almost kind of creates a little miniature landscape, okay? So definitely try some of these out. I'm going to let these dry fully on their own. That's another important part of the exercise too when you're testing pigments. Just let them do what they're going to do, and so that you can see what you'll get. Let's see. Let me see if I've got any questions here. I'm going to go back to the to my view here. So I hope that was helpful for you. I love doing sample cards, and like I said, it's low pressure, lots of fun. You're giving yourself an education, and you know, even if you need to, you know, I've got my little cards are taped off, so when they're dry and I peel the tape away, I can make some notes in my little margin or whatever. You know, you can do whatever you want to. Just make it yours, and then you know you've got a little library of cards. And if you're not sure what a pigment's going to do, go pull your card, and it will tell you what it's going to do.